McKenna, hand over the Apache woman. She doesn't belong here.
She's a free woman on land that belongs to us.
Rancher won the lottery, thinking he'd get rich. But the Apache widow, they gave him owned the land under his feet's Silver Creek, Arizona territory. March 1882. The morning Silas McKenna learned he'd lost everything, the sky hung pale as old bone and vultures drifted in slow, lazy spirals above his dying cattle. They moved without urgency, like they'd been expecting this moment long before Silas admitted it himself. 20 head gone in 3 days. The drought had stripped his pastures bare, turning grass to brittle needles that snapped under boot and hoof alike. The well had coughed up its last muddy swallow on Tuesday. Now the earth itself felt like an enemy hot hollow withholding. And Jesse lay burning with fever in the back room, breath fast, skin hot as an iron left in the forge too long. Silas had exactly $11 left. $11 between a dying ranch, a sick boy, and a future that looked as dry and unforgiving as the land around him. Comment the number 1 if you're listening to this story right now. The bank notice crackled in his fist, damp with sweat and anger. 21 days to pay $800 or lose Twin Rivers Ranch. His father had carved this place out of thorn brush and raw stone with his own blood. His mother rested beneath the cottonwood by the creek, back when the creek actually ran. Silas stared toward its empty gully, now a scar of dust through the land, and felt the same emptiness tearing through him. He swore under his breath. He'd be the McKenna who lost it all. After generations of holding on, he'd be the one who finally couldn't. "Uncle?" The voice drifted weak from the house, thin as smoke. Jesse. 8 years old, small for his age, and already too familiar with grief. Cholera had taken his parents, Silas's younger brother and his wife, last winter. They'd buried them in frozen ground, and Silas had sworn he'd keep the boy safe. He just never expected the world to keep testing that promise. Silas stepped inside. The air in the little bedroom was thick with heat despite the cool morning. Jesse lay curled on his side, shivering under a blanket. His skin glistened with fever sweat. Water, the boy rasped. Silas lifted the last pitcher. Half a bucket was all they had in the house. After that, they'd have to ride 12 miles to town, and even Saguaro Wells was running dry these days. He raised the cup gently to Jesse's cracked lips. The boy drank, but most of the water trickled down his chin. Silas wiped it away with the edge of his sleeve. "I'm riding to Saguaro Wells," he said quietly. "Doc Morrison might have something." Jesse's gaze fluttered, trying to focus. "We got money for medicine." Silas didn't answer right away. $11. Dying cattle. A ranch hanging on by a frayed thread. "Don't you worry about that," he finally muttered. But they both knew. Jesse's eyes drifted shut again, too tired to argue. Silas stood a moment, watching the boy fight for breath. 34 years on this earth had taught him that hope was just another way to soften the blow of what was already coming. The war had taught him that. The Apache campaigns after had carved it deeper. Now the land itself seemed determined to repeat the lesson. He saddled Sage, his mare, and set out. The sun was barely above the mesa, but its heat already felt pointed, personal. Sage picked her way across the cracked earth with the weary caution of an animal who knew every step cost something. The weight of Silas's colt on his hip was the only familiar comfort. The ride to town stretched into 3 hours. By the time he crested the last rise and saw Saguaro Wells slumped between 2 mesas, his throat felt lined with grit. The town looked smaller than ever. Adobe walls dulled by dust, wooden porches sagging like tired shoulders. Doors closed, windows shuttered. Folks didn't linger outdoors in weather like this unless forced, which is why the crowd caught his attention. Nearly 40 people clustered outside the saloon, voices low and eager. In a place where heat usually kept folks inside until dusk, that alone spelled trouble. Silas tied Sage to the hitching post and approached every bone on alert. Sheriff Corwin and Mayor Holcomb stood atop a makeshift platform, looking smug in that way only men with power and nothing to lose ever managed. "Step right up, gentlemen," Corwin called, voice coated in the false cheer of a snake oil peddler. "Territorial government authorized a special lottery. $1 entry. Winner takes home a prize worth enough to turn a man's fortune. Silas's jaw tightened. He felt for the coins in his pocket, so few he could count them by memory alone. He started toward Doc Morrison's office when a hand closed around his arm. Ed Harrington. Silas. "You should listen," Ed said quietly. "They're saying the prize is worth thousands. Nothing legal is worth thousands for a dollar chance." Ed's face darkened. Nobody said it was legal. Just official. Before Silas could reply, Corwin's voice cut through the murmurs. "McKenna," he boomed, "hear you're having troubles at Twin Rivers. This could solve all your problems." Heads turned. Pity, curiosity, a little hunger. Small towns loved a man's downfall almost as much as his comeback. Silas felt heat crawl up his spine, not from shame, but from the way Corwin's grin stripped him bare. He stepped forward, placed a silver dollar on the table, and took the ticket. "Number 32, the mayor announced. Silas pocketed it and pushed through to the doctor's office. Inside, Doc Morrison rummaged through near-empty shelves. "The boy needs quinine," the doctor said, "but shipment was robbed. They're blaming Apache, but I don't believe that story for a moment." Silas swallowed bitterness. "What do you have, Laudanum? Might bring the fever down." $3. $3 for a maybe. But maybe was still more than nothing. He paid, took the bottle, and stepped back into the sun. The crowd had thickened. Someone had passed out whiskey. The air rippled with heat and anticipation, men drawn to the promise of fortune the way fire drew moths. Corwin lifted a slip of paper from the box. "Number 32. A hush rolled through the crowd. Suddenly, Silas felt that little scrap in his pocket like a stone trying to sink him. McKenna Corwin crowed. "Come, claim your fortune." Silas walked forward, Ed, watching him with something like warning in his eyes. The deputies disappeared behind the saloon. A door slammed. Then they emerged, dragging someone between them. A woman. No, not just a woman. Apache. Her wrists were bound. Dust clung to her calico dress. Her hair, black with streaks of premature gray, hung in 2 braids, still neat, despite the rough handling. She moved stiffly, but she moved on her own feet, refusing to be carried. And her eyes were dark, sharp, unbroken. She looked at the crowd with quiet contempt, and at Silas with something unreadable, something that pierced deeper than fear or plea. Corwin spread his arms triumphant. "Gentlemen, here is our prize. Property of the territorial office until claimed. Worth more than any man here could earn in a year." Silas felt the words like a slap. Prize. Property. The woman's chin lifted another inch, as if daring the world to shame her. He had spent $1 and won a human being. The crowd murmured approval, discomfort, envy. Some men smirked. Others looked away. Silas stood rooted, heat swelling in his chest, hands clenching at his sides. The woman met his eyes again. No fear, only defiance. And something else, something like judgment. As if she already knew what kind of man he was, and what kind he had to choose to be next. "Your prize," McKenna Corwin declared, swelling with the kind of triumph only small men with sudden power ever felt. "A genuine Apache widow. Speaks English, knows healing ways, can cook and clean, and well, whatever else you might need." Laughter broke from the crowd, harsh, jagged, eager to cut. Someone let out a whistle sharp enough to split the air. Another voice hollered a crude remark that sent ripples of ugly amusement through the onlookers. Silas felt something turn inside him. A slow, coiling sick. "This is slavery," he said, his voice low. "This is law." Corwin shot back, lips curling. "Prisoner of war. No different than contraband. And you," he jabbed a finger toward Silas, "won her fair and square." Silas opened his mouth to argue, but the woman spoke first. "My name," she said, steady as stone, "is Itzel Morningstar." Her eyes met his dark, unflinching, old, in a way that had nothing to do with age. "And you should know your ranch sits on my grandfather's bones." Silence fell like a dropped blade. A wind gusted down the street, lifting dust around their feet. Somewhere a horse snorted nervously. Corwin's face reddened. "Shut your mouth, woman." But Itzel didn't even look at him. She kept her gaze fixed on Silas. Twin Rivers Ranch, she continued, the two streams that meet at the Red Rocks. That was Nade land, my family's land, long before your maps and fences. Silas felt the world shift under him, like stepping on loose shale. His father had always insisted they bought the land legal through the territorial office. But looking into Itzel's eyes, steady, accusing, ancient, he suddenly wondered what legal meant when the men writing laws held rifles and ink in the same hand. Corwin cleared his throat. "Take your prize and go, McKenna." His voice held a warning now brittle as cheap glass. "You're making a spectacle." Silas walked toward Itzel. The deputies still held her by the arms, but she stood upright, refusing to bend. He slipped his knife from its sheath and cut the rope at her wrists. The fibers snapped with a soft hiss. She rubbed the angry red marks without looking away from him. "I'm not anyone's property," she said. "No," Silas answered, surprising himself with how true the word felt. "You're not." He turned to the crowd. "She's coming with me because she chooses to. If anybody has a problem with that," he rested a hand on the butt of his Colt, "they can bring it to me." Men shuffled. No one spoke. Corwin spat in the dirt but said nothing else. Silas helped Itzel mount behind him on Sage. She didn't hold him, but he could feel her there, solid, balanced, radiating a quiet heat, like a coal buried in ash. She smelled faintly of earth after rain, though Silas hadn't seen rain in months. They rode out of Saguaro Wells as the sun sagged westward, stretching their shadows across the hardpan. Neither spoke. The rhythm of the horse, the creak of leather, the sigh of dry wind through sagebrush, those were their only words. Halfway home, Silas realized he wasn't sure how to speak to her at all. She wasn't afraid, wasn't pleading, wasn't grateful. She rode like someone who had already survived worse things than a sheriff's humiliation. When they reached the ridge above Twin Rivers Ranch, Itzel made a small, uneven sound. Not a gasp, not quite grief, more like memory brushing old wounds. "It's changed," she murmured. "You've been here before?" Silas asked. "I was born here." Her voice tightened, just a fraction. "Where your house stands now, there was a grove of pinyon pines. My grandmother is buried beneath them." Silas stared at the land, his land, and for the first time saw it as more than dirt and fences, saw what it must have been before men like him came, before his father came, before the maps, the cattle, the bank notices. "I'm sorry," he said. Itzel looked at him, eyes unreadable. "For what?" "For winning me in a lottery, for living on stolen land, for being another white man who says sorry with his mouth, while his boots still crush what my people left behind." He opened his mouth, closed it again. He had no answer that didn't feel hollow as a dried gourd. At the house, Jesse's fever had turned vicious. The boy thrashed in the bed, calling out for his mother, then his father, then Silas, then no one at all. His skin shimmered with heat. His breath rattled like old paper. Itzel crossed the room in 3 strides. She knelt beside Jesse and placed one hand lightly on his brow. Her face changed, not softening, but sharpening. Focused. Keen. She murmured something in Apache Silas didn't understand. "How long?" she asked. 3 days. Itzel clicked her tongue, irritated. "The laudanum will cloud his lungs and slow his spirit. He needs Decoob desert willow bark and prickly pear root. Maybe creosote leaves if his fever runs too deep." She stood. "Do you trust me?" It should have been a simple question. It wasn't. Coming from a woman he'd just won, it felt like a blade held out by its handle safe, only if he took it with care. But Jesse was dying. "Yes," Silas said. Itzel nodded, once grabbed an empty sack hanging by the door, and headed out into the desert without hesitation, as if the land itself knew her and was willing to guide her. Silas stayed with Jesse, cooling the boy's skin, with the last of their water, counting each shuddering breath. He stared at the doorway until his eyes blurred, half fearing Itzel wouldn't return, half fearing she would. The sun was nearing the western mesa when her silhouette appeared, walking, not hurrying, holding a bundle of plants cradled to her chest. Silas met her at the door. "You were gone for hours. I was where I needed to be." She brushed past him. "Boil water." He obeyed. Itzel worked with steady hands, crushing herbs, steeping roots, whispering under her breath, not prayers exactly, more like instructions to the plants themselves. The mixture smelled of sap and dust, bitterness and life. "Hold his head," she said. Together they lifted Jesse enough for the tea to touch his lips. At first he resisted, but then he swallowed one strained mouthful after another. The hours crawled. Night drew in. Coyotes yipped somewhere beyond the far fence. A breeze nudged the open window, carrying desert chill. Then Jesse's breathing shifted. His thrashing eased. His muscles relaxed. Sweat formed across his brow, and color crept back into his skin, faint, fragile, real. Silas exhaled shakily. "He'll live," Itzel said. "No pride, no softness, just truth. The desert provides what we need, but only if we remember how to ask." Later, when the boy slept deeply for the first time in days, Silas and Itzel sat on the porch. The sky above them glittered with stars so bright they seemed carved into the darkness. The night wind brushed their faces, cool and quiet. Silas cleared his throat. "Why did you come with me?" he asked. "You could have refused. You could have stayed. You could have fought." Itzel didn't look at him. She looked at the land stretching out in all directions. "Because," she said slowly, "I wanted to see what kind of man spent his last dollar not to buy a woman, but to free one." The words hung between them, soft as dust, heavy as truth. "And now that you've seen," Silas asked. Itzel turned her face toward him. Her eyes reflected starlight, sharp, steady, unafraid. "I'm still deciding. Would you prefer I'd stay to be sold to someone else?" "That's not what I mean." She was quiet for a long moment, so long that Silas heard only the slow ticking of the porch lantern cooling behind them, and the desert wind moving through the dry grass. "My husband died 2 winters ago," she said at last. Her voice carried no tremble, no plea, only memory, shaped sharp by time. "Army soldiers shot him for stealing horses he'd already owned for 10 years. They said he stole from the fort. But those horses were gifts from my father on our wedding day." Silas felt the words settle into him heavy as saddlestones. "My children died the winter before that," she went on. "Smallpox. Blankets from the trading post, government issue. They said it was charity." A hollow, humorless sound escaped her. Charity. The night deepened around them. A coyote called somewhere beyond the ridge, lonely and thin. "I have no people left," Itzel said softly. "No home left. No place left." She drew a slow breath, then turned her face toward him. "When you cut that rope today, you looked at me like a person. That alone is rare enough to be worth something." Silas swallowed. "This land," he said, cautious, "as walking on thawing river ice. You said it was your family's." "It was." She tilted her chin. "It is. Land doesn't know about paper deeds. Only people pretend it does." She gave him a sideways look, unreadable. "And you're going to lose it anyway. I heard about your bank troubles in town." "Probably," Silas admitted. She studied him, eyes reflecting the porch lantern like 2 dark stars. "Unless." He turned to face her fully. "Unless what? There is something you don't know about this land." She rose, moving to the edge of the porch, staring toward the mesas that held the night like ancient guardians. "Something my grandfather hid before the soldiers came." She pointed with her chin toward the dark stretch of earth. "Do you know why it's called Twin Rivers? Even though the water dried up 5 years ago," Silas shook his head. "No, because the rivers aren't gone. They went underground." She touched the earth with her fingertips, reverent and sure. "My grandfather knew the drought was coming. He could read the signs of birds, soil, wind. So he carved channels beneath the canyon floor, guided the water where white men wouldn't think to look." Silas felt heat bloom in his chest, not the heat of the night, but something sharper. "Water," he whispered. "There's water here, more than water." She rose and faced him, eyes glowing with quiet fire. "There's a reason the government wanted this land. A reason they sent soldiers. A reason they killed my family and tried to erase our claim." Silas felt his pulse drumming in his ears. "There is a silver vein," Itzel said, "running deep under your eastern pasture. My grandfather discovered it 60 years ago. Told us never to speak of it except to family. Silver." The word left Silas like a prayer he didn't trust himself to say. He swallowed. "How much silver?" "Enough to pay your debts," she said. enough to make men kill for it. Her gaze hardened. Which is why Corwin arranged that lottery. Silas felt the world tilt again, sharper this time, like stepping into a hole you didn't see. What you think it was chance you won. Her voice was steady, almost pitying. Corwin knows about the silver. He's been trying to get this land for years, but the deed is in your name. And you, she hesitated, you're too stubborn to sell. So he found another way, Silas murmured, pieces clicking into place, like the teeth of a rusty trap. Embarrass me, ruin my standing, make the town turn on me, let the bank foreclose. Then he'd buy the land for pennies, Itzel said, after you were run out or hung. Silas clenched his jaw. Corwin's smug grin from the saloon echoed in his head, now tinged with a different meaning, calculated, predatory. But he didn't count on one thing, Itzel said. What's that? My grandmother filed the original claim to this land. Before your father. Before the Americans even drew a border here. She stepped closer, voice dropping. I have the papers. Hidden but real. By Apache law, by Mexican law, and even by your American law. If you trace it far enough, this land is mine. Silas stared at her, breathing slow, like he'd been punched. Then I'm the one trespassing. Yes. Her voice held no accusation, just truth. But I need someone who can work within your legal system. Someone who can help me claim what was stolen. And you... She glanced toward the house where Jesse slept. You need water, silver, a way to keep the boy alive. Silas rubbed his thumb over his palm, thinking. So, what are you saying, that we help each other? She stepped closer, close enough he could smell sage and desert wind tangled in her hair. Partners. He blinked. If I'm willing to have an Apache widow as a partner? If you're willing, she said. Some men would rather burn their own house down than stand beside a woman like me. Before Silas could respond, a new noise cut through the night, the rhythmic pounding of hooves. Many hooves, coming fast. Silas stood, his rifle already in his hands. Horses. Itzel listened. 8, maybe 9. Not soldiers. Too sloppy. Too loud, Corwin, Silas said. He's coming to see whether his plan worked. She placed a hand briefly on his arm, steady, grounding. I'll protect the boy. You handle them. But when the riders crested the ridge, Silas saw it wasn't just Corwin and his deputies. It was half the damned town. Banker Fredericks, Minister Thompson, the livery owner, 2 ranch hands from the South Mesa, and damn it all, even Doc Morrison, who'd just taken Silas's last dollars that afternoon. Torches lit their faces from below, creating grotesque masks of men Silas had known since childhood. Men who'd shared coffee with him, traded cattle with him, buried kin beside his own family's dead. They stopped, just beyond rifle range horses, stamping nervously at the smell of kerosene and tension. McKenna Corwin shouted, We need to talk about your situation. Silas stepped off the porch, rifle resting easy in his hands, but nothing easy lay behind it. Talk, he said. It's come to our attention, Corwin called, trying to sound official, that you're harboring an Apache woman. That ain't fitting for a white community. She's a free woman, Silas said, voice flat on my land. Your land, Banker Fredericks nudged his horse forward. Not for much longer. I'm calling in your note, McKenna. Full payment by sunrise. Or I foreclose. That notice gave me 21 days, Silas growled. That was before Fredericks said you brought savagery into our midst. The bank has discretion to protect community standards. The minister raised a quivering hand. Think of the boy Silas. What kind of influence is this for young Jesse? Itzel appeared silently at Silas's shoulder, a shadow shaped by starlight. She said nothing, but her presence alone made several men pull back on their reins. Silas felt something old and hard ignite in his chest, a fury he'd thought the war had carved out of him. He leveled his rifle, not pointed but ready. You all best think real careful, he said softly, dangerously, about what side of this line you want to die on. The crowd shifted. No one answered. And the desert wind carried the silence like a blade, the kind that saved his life. She broke his fever with medicine Doc Morrison couldn't provide. There was shuffling among the mob. Horses sidestepped, hooves scraping the hardpan. The doctor looked deeply uncomfortable, twisting the reins in his hands, as though wishing he were anywhere else. Nevertheless, Corwin pressed on, raising his voice, like a man who sensed power slipping through his fingers. You have a choice. Send the woman away tonight, and Fredericks, he jerked his chin toward the banker, might reconsider the timeline. Might, Silas echoed. The banker shrugged lips thin as a money ledger. Depends how cooperative you are. Or Corwin continued, you keep her, he spat the word like something rotten, and lose everything by morning. Your choice. The night was hot enough to pull sweat from a stone, but Silas felt cold. Just then the door behind him opened. Itzel stepped out of the house, and the mob tensed as if she'd drawn steel. Hands twitched toward holsters. Torches lifted. Men held their breath. But she wasn't armed. She carried Jesse. The boy was curled against her shoulder. His small arms looped around her neck. His face slack with the deep healing sleep of a fever broken. His cheek rested against Itzel's collarbone, utterly unafraid. The child needs rest, she said, her voice calm and steady. Your shouting disturbs him. The sight of a sleeping white boy in the arms of an Apache widow hit the crowd like a thrown stone. Several men looked away, their bravado cracking. Others shifted in their saddles, suddenly uncertain. Put the boy down, woman, Corwin barked. No. Itzel met his glare without blinking. He is sick and needs care. Unless you'd rather he die just to make your point. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Corwin's face. Minister Thompson's horse stepped backward of its own accord, ears flat, sensing tension. The minister swallowed. Surely we can discuss this. Tomorrow, tonight, Corwin snapped. McKenna makes his choice tonight. Silas looked at the mob, his neighbors, his so-called community. Men who'd eaten at his table and borrowed his tools. Men who'd offered sympathy when cholera took his brother, who'd called Jesse a brave boy. Now those same men sat on torches and threats. He looked at Itzel standing barefoot on his porch, holding Jesse with a tenderness that made his chest tighten. She looked back at him with complete faith, not in him as a savior, but as someone capable of standing up. He thought about his father building this ranch out of nothing, about his mother planting lilacs that never survived the dry years. He thought about deeds and laws and all the paper in the world pretending to understand land better than the people who'd lived on it for centuries. He took a breath. I've made my choice, Silas said. Get off my land. Itzel's eyes flickered with something, respect or gratitude or simply acknowledgement. Our land, she corrected softly. Silas looked at her, really looked, and something passed between them. Something wordless. Something like a vow. Our land, he repeated. The words rolled out across the mob like thunder. Fredericks jerked in his saddle. What's she talking about, Itzel? Shifted Jesse carefully into one arm, then reached the other hand into the hidden pocket of her dress. She pulled out a folded paper, creased, yellowed, fragile with age. The original land grant, she said, signed by my grandmother Itzel Morningstar and witnessed by the Mexican territorial governor in 1821, before your government existed here, before your laws overrode ours. That's worthless paper. Corwin snarled, though Silas saw his hand tremble slightly on the reins. Actually, said a new voice from the darkness, it's not. Every head turned. A horse emerged slowly from the shadows, its rider tall, straight-backed, despite his age. Judge Samuel Whitmore. The territorial judge. The one man rumored to treat Apache and settler claims with equal scrutiny. He was supposed to be 2 days' ride away in Tucson. His presence here changed everything. Judge Corwin began swallowing panic. We didn't expect. Whitmore raised a hand, silencing him. I received an interesting telegram this afternoon, the judge said, voice cool as a creek in spring. From the Federal Land Office. Seems there have been irregularities in several property claims in this county. A ripple went through the crowd like spooked cattle shifting. The judge continued. Claims filed over existing land grants. Mexican and Spanish grants that should have been honored under the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, something your predecessors conveniently ignored. He rode closer, eyes sharp under the brim of his hat. I also received reports of an illegal lottery. Sheriff Corwin, trafficking in human beings. In 1882, we fought a war over that sort of thing. She's Apache, Corwin began. She, Whitmore snapped, is a free woman under federal law. And if that paper she's holding is what I believe it is, he nodded toward Itzel. Then She is also the legitimate owner of one of the largest silver deposits in this territory. Silence swallowed the night whole. Silver Frederick squeaked, all composure gone. Itzel allowed herself the faintest smile the first Silas had ever seen from her. Warm, dangerous knowing. My grandfather found it in 1822, she said. He recorded the claim with the Mexican government. The documents are legal. Mr. McKenna's father purchased surface rights only grazing and farming. The mineral rights were never his to sell. Silas blinked, stunned. He had lived his whole life on land that wasn't truly his, yet somehow belonged to both of them, more hers than anyone. Which means, Judge Whitmore said, sweeping a cold gaze across the crowd, the territory had no right to grant this land to anyone. Any attempt to foreclose on it would be inadvisable. That was the moment the mob began to crumble. Men backed their horses away slowly at first, then quicker. Torches lowered. Eyes darted. No one wanted to be caught on the wrong side of a federal judge and a silver claim worth killing over. "This isn't over," Corwin hissed. "Yes," Whitmore replied, "it is. I have federal marshals coming by sunrise. Anyone involved in human trafficking or fraudulent land claims will be arrested. I suggest you all go home and pray your names don't appear on my docket." The mob dissolved like smoke in a windstorm. One by one, torches vanished into the darkness, leaving only the judge in their wake. Whitmore dismounted. "Mrs. Morningstar," he said, tipping his hat with genuine respect, "your grandmother was a remarkable woman. I had the honor of meeting her once." Itzel inclined her head. "She spoke of you, said you were the only honest white man in the territory." Whitmore chuckled softly. "I try to be." He turned to Silas. "You've made powerful enemies tonight." Silas nodded. "Seems I've made a powerful friend, too." The judge's eyes flicked between the two of them. "Partners, from what I heard." His voice softened. "Good. This land needs partnership, not conquest." He swung back into his saddle. "I'll file the paperwork tomorrow. Joint ownership. Equal partners. That acceptable?" Silas looked at Itzel. Itzel nodded, once steady and sure. "More than acceptable," Silas said. Whitmore tipped his hat again and rode off into the darkness. Silas and Itzel stood alone on the quiet porch. Jessie stirred in her arms, whispering, "Water." Silas exhaled. "Speaking of water." Itzel smiled, fuller, warmer, something soft awakening in the corners of her eyes. "Tomorrow," she said, "when the sun rises, I'll show you where the rivers hide." She looked down at Jessie, brushing a strand of hair from the boy's forehead. But tonight, she murmured, "We let the boy rest." The desert wind sighed through the sage, carrying with it the first hint of a future neither of them had expected, but both now owned a piece of. Together. She carried Jessie inside, and Silas followed. Something in the house had changed, subtle as the first breeze, before dawn but unmistakable. It no longer felt like a tomb of old memories and unpaid debts. It felt waiting, expectant, as though the walls, long starved of warmth, recognized a new shape of life inside them, not his alone anymore. Shared, balanced, like the first trickle of water beneath cracked earth. Silas watched Itzel settle Jessie onto the cot he'd slept in since the fever took hold. She smoothed the boy's hair with a tenderness that didn't demand gratitude and didn't perform mercy, it simply was. Jessie sighed in his sleep and nestled deeper into the blanket. For a moment, Silas let himself imagine this scene lasting beyond tonight. Later, lying on his bedroll beside the cold fireplace, he couldn't sleep. The dark pressed around him thick with the scent of juniper smoke and desert dust. His hand drifted to the inside pocket of his coat. The lottery ticket. Number 32. A slip of paper that had almost cost him everything. Or maybe, just maybe, it had returned something the world had stolen long ago. He'd thought he was gambling for fortune. But what he'd won was truth. The truth about land. About survival. About the way men wrote laws to sanctify theft. The truth about the quiet endurance of people like Itzel Morningstar, who lived beneath the weight of other men's stories and still managed to walk with dignity. And now he held the proof that everything he'd believed about Twin Rivers Ranch had been incomplete, a half-told tale missing its first chapters. Sleep finally took him like a slow tide. At first light, Itzel woke him with a nudge of her boot. "Come," she said, "before the sun rises too high." She led him eastward toward the rocks that glowed soft pink under the morning. The air was still cool, tinged with the mineral scent of night-cooled earth. Jesse trotted behind, still sleepy but determined not to be left out. They reached a shallow dip in the ground, nothing more than a depression between two boulders. "Here," Itzel said. "Dig here." Silas put his weight behind the shovel. The soil was hard at first, compacted by years of drought, but then 3 feet down the dirt turned cool. 4 feet wet. Sticky mud clung to the shovel. At 5 feet, water seeped upward, clear as glass, and cold enough to numb his fingers. Silas stared. "Well, I'll be damned." "The river," Itzel said, kneeling beside him. "It flows through limestone caverns now. My grandfather diverted it when he knew the drought was coming. Enough water runs here to make this valley live again." "And the silver?" Silas asked. "Deeper." She tapped the ground with her fingers. "Follow the water downward through the stone. You'll find the vein, but carefully. Take only what you need." She looked at him, eyes serious. "The earth doesn't forgive greed." Weeks passed. The ranch, once dying, began to breathe again. Under Itzel's guidance, Silas dug new wells, deep ones that reached the underground river. Water flowed through channels carved by hands dead long before he'd been born. They irrigated parched fields, filled the troughs, revived the cottonwood that had nearly surrendered. Jesse recovered fully, first walking, then running, then racing the horses with childish bravado. He followed Itzel like a small, adoring shadow, picking up Apache words that mixed with his English in a jumble of sound that made Silas smile. They found silver too. Enough to pay the banknote, enough to repair the barn, enough to build a future. But they didn't mine recklessly. They took only small amounts, melting the ore in a hidden forge and selling it quietly in Tucson so no rumor spread. The rest remained untouched, sleeping beneath the earth, like a promise. Corwin fled ahead of the federal warrants. Others in town faced trial, fraud, conspiracy, unlawful detention. The town changed slowly, uneasily adjusting to the new order. The McKenna Ranch became the McKenna Morningstar Ranch. And prosperity flowed not from conquest, but from partnership. 6 months later, on an evening when the desert burned gold and purple, Silas found Itzel standing at the edge of the first well they dug together. The sky behind her was a ribbon of fire, painting her silhouette in bronze. Jesse played nearby, stacking stones and arranging sticks, in patterns only he understood. "My grandmother would have liked this," Itzel said quietly. "What?" Silas asked. "This." She gestured toward the green-sprouting fields, the revived cottonwood, the neat channels where water whispered across soil. Her land being loved again. Used but not abused. Shared but not stolen. Silas stepped beside her, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her skin. "Is that what we're doing, sharing?" She looked at him, those dark eyes that had once been unreadable, but had grown familiar, expressive, rich, with unspoken stories. "What do you think?" she asked. Silas looked out across the land. He thought of the lottery ticket he still kept folded in his drawer. He thought of the water running beneath their feet. He thought of the silver hidden in the dark. He thought of Jesse whispering "Mama Itzel" when he thought no one was listening. He thought of nights spent on the porch, her presence beside him, quiet and steady as the stars. "I think, Silas," said slowly, voice thick, "that I won a lottery I didn't know I was playing." "Oh?" she asked softly. "The lottery for a partner," he said, "for someone who could teach me to see this land as more than property." For he hesitated, breath-catching. For she prompted, and now there was something unmistakably soft in her voice, a warmth that hadn't been there before, or maybe had always been there, waiting for him to be ready. Silas turned toward her fully. "For someone to build a life with," he said. "For a chance at the family I thought I'd lost." She was quiet for a moment. Then she reached out and took his hand, her fingers calloused but gentle. "The land owns us," she said, "not the other way around. But maybe together we can belong to it properly." That night, as the stars emerged in their eternal patterns, the three of them sat on the porch. The soldier turned rancher, the Apache widow who owned the ground beneath their feet, and the boy who would grow up knowing both worlds. The ranch spread around them, no longer dying, but alive with hidden water and careful hope. Somewhere in the desert, a coyote called. Somewhere else, its pack answered. And at Twin Rivers Ranch, where Apache memory met a